Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear evidence from a witness from the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology. Yes, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, and good morning to you, members of the panel. I now call Mr. David Metcalfe, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Metcalfe.
Morning.
I understand that you're going to make the affirmation.
Correct.
Would you then please read the words on the screen in front of you?
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Please sit down and make yourself comfortable there. All right? Yes, Mr. Metcalfe,
Yes,
when you're
Mr.
ready.
Chairman. Thank you. Can I start, Mr. Metcalfe, by welcoming you to the inquiry and thanking you very much for coming to give your evidence and for assisting us in our investigations. We're very grateful to you. If you have any difficulty understanding my questions, I'm happy to repeat them or put the question in a different way, just say. Can I also just ask you, please, not to nod or shake your head? You can do that, but you have to accompany the gesture with either a yes or a no, because otherwise it doesn't go down on the transcript. Can I also ask you to keep your voice up?
Certainly.
Thank you very much. If you need a break at any time other than our scheduled breaks, which will be mid-morning and mid-afternoon, then just say, and we can take a short break.
Thank you.
Now, I should just ask you, have you seen your witness statement that you've given to the inquiry?
I have, yes.
It's at CWCT 50115. Sorry, CWCT 40115. Is that it?
That is my witness statement.
Can we go, please, to page 24? There's a signature above the name David Metcalfe and the date 20th of October 2021. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
Have you read this witness statement recently?
Yes, I have.
Are the contents of this statement true?
They are true.
Have you discussed this statement or the evidence that you're going to give with anybody before coming here today?
I've discussed it with my solicitor. I've also discussed certain aspects of CWCT's work with a colleague, and I've given a statement to the Metropolitan Police.
I see. And who's the colleague?
Alan Keeler.
Right. Now, the Metropolitan Police statement, we have one statement from you. It's MET 3080673. Can we please put that up on the screen? There it is. Is that your police statement that you've signed?
Yes, it is.
It is. And it says David Metcalfe, and there's a date to the right which says the 24th of June 2021. You can see that there. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Can you confirm that that statement is true?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to ask you first about your background, your previous employment, and your role at CWCT. First, CWCT, that stands for Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
And what is it?
CWCT is an industry-funded research and technical organisation established to provide training and improve standards in the facade industry.
Is it a private company?
Yes.
Is it a not-for-profit company in the sense that it retains its profits and puts them back into the business? Or
That is correct.
That is correct. It doesn't distribute its profits.
Correct.
Now, if we can go, please, to your witness statement, your inquiry witness statement, paragraph 6, please, on page 2. You say there, CWCT was established over 30 years ago with a simple mission statement to improve the cladding industry. The formation of CWCT was, in effect, a collaboration between industry and academia. The key roles identified were to provide guidance and training in all areas of facade engineering. Was there anything specific, to your knowledge, that prompted the formation of CWCT?
My understanding is that there was a NEDO report, National Economic Development Office report in the 1980s that looked at the construction industry and I believe looked at the facade industry or the cladding industry, and they concluded that there were a lack of standards, there was a lack of training, a lack of guidance, and on the back of that report, CWCT was formed.
Who were the founding members? Do you know?
I don't know.
What was the gap in industry or academia that the CWCT was intended to fill? Do you know?
There was, at that point, in the late 1980s, there was little, if any, guidance specifically related to what we might call modern building envelopes. So it was to fill that gap.
Fill the gap. And why was academia involved rather than just industry? Do you know?
So, my understanding is that there was a professor at the University of Bath, Professor Ted Happold, who established the consultancy firm BRE Happold. He was a professor at the university. He recognised the significance of the facade and was quite an influential person, and he was able to persuade some companies to provide some funding to establish the centre.
And was, looking at industry on the one hand and academia on the other, was one group or other group more or less influential than the other in respect of the training and guidance?
I wouldn't say either. I think the guidance we provide is balanced and always has been.
And do you know, and it was before your time, I think, but do you know before CWCT was formed, which body provided the training that you refer to in relation to facade engineering?
I don't think there was any organisation that did that.
Right. During your time, looking back on it so far, would you consider that the CWCT considers that it has any competitors in the facade industry?
There are various trade associations that provide specific guidance for their members, the likes of the Council for Aluminium and Building, the Glass and Glazing Federation, the Metal Roofing and Cladding Association. Our membership is very broad, so we provide more general guidance rather than guidance specifically related to a particular part of the industry.
Yes. Now, in paragraph 7, it's still on your screen, you'd say that the CWCT is a small organisation with a broad membership base made up of about 350 companies. And you say that it includes architects, main contractors, specialist contractors, suppliers and manufacturers. Are there two categories of member, sponsors and ordinary members?
That's correct.
And just broadly, what's the difference?
Sponsors are able to attend board meetings and technical committee meetings, so they have a greater role in the organisation.
I see. And ordinary members?
But by default, don't have
right.
access to board meetings or technical committee meetings.
And what does it take to be a sponsor? How do you qualify to be a sponsor?
Sponsors are companies who are willing to pay a bit more money to be a sponsor, and to generally they want to actively participate in the work that we do.
Right. And during the period 2013 to 2017, were the sponsors mainly from industry or mainly from academia?
All from industry.
All from industry. And were there any particular industry members, manufacturers, designers, who were particularly influential as sponsors?
I couldn't name one particular organisation.
There's no one who stands out in your head as somebody who would lead the charge for manufacturers, for example?
No, it didn't really. It just doesn't really work like that. All the sponsors come together. We meet 6 times a year, and we have an open discussion about any issues that they might be facing, whether it's from a consultant or a manufacturer, and we aim to try and respond to that.
Now, if you scroll down, please, a little further down page 2, you will see paragraph 8. Our primary objectives are to produce guidance, carry out research and provide training in the area of facade engineering. Can you give us some examples of the research that CWCT has carried out and how it was funded?
So we've carried out research on various different topics, including on security, on thermal performance, on automated facades, and various other topics. Some funding has been from government, from the DTI as they were, and various iterations of that, and some research is self-funded.
And had there been any particular research carried out in relation to the fire safety of facades?
No.
Never.
Not by CWCT, no.
Right.
We've produced guidance on the subject, but not carried out research.
Has anybody, any sponsor or ordinary member, ever suggested that CWCT do so?
Since Grenfell, some one or two organisations have suggested that we do that, and we haven't done that as yet.
Right, but not before Grenfell.
Not that I recall.
Paragraph 9, foot of the page there, you say that the CWCT has a sponsors board and a technical committee that approves all written guidance that's produced. The sponsors board, is that a board comprised only of sponsors, or is it the general board on which sponsors sit?
It's the general board at which sponsors sit, so 4 named directors and our sponsors.
Right. Now, you say that the sponsors pay a bit more money, you told us earlier this morning. How much more, percentage-wise?
Sponsors pay £3,000 a year. Ordinary members pay between 650 and 1,300, depending on what type of organisation they are.
I follow. And was that always the position in the years 2013 to 2017? I mean, the figures may have changed a bit, but that sort of proportion.
Excuse me. Previously, sponsors paid slightly more. They paid £6,000. We decided to reduce that number in around 2014, 2015, I think, to encourage more companies to be sponsors.
Right. And why did you want to encourage more companies to be sponsors?
We wanted more involvement from the industry.
Right. And the benefits that they get in return for the extra payment is involvement in the is this right? In the internal workings, management hierarchies, budgets of CWCT and its strategies.
They are there to provide strategic direction for the company, so to inform us of things that they think that we should be looking at, the sort of guidance that we should be providing, the sort of events that we should be running, and so on.
Just exploring that a little bit more, would a sponsor have a right to appoint an executive director to the board?
No.
Would a sponsor habitually do so, or
No.
try to do so?
No.
Were executive directors drawn from sponsors, or were they or drawn from ordinary members, or elsewhere?
Elsewhere.
Was there an internal set of principles about who should be directors, executive directors?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. And who would decide who should be executive directors?
So that there are 3 long-standing directors who've been named directors for as long as I can remember. The previous chairman of CWCT stepped down a number of years ago, and the board decided that we would like one of the sponsors to become a director. It was a group decision, effectively.
Who was that? Who was the sponsor who became an executive director?
Severio Passetto.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, and I'm not sure the transcriber did.
Severio Passetto.
Severio Passetto. And what organisation?
He is head of facades for Skanska UK.
Skanska. And when was he appointed as a director?
In around 2016, 17.
Right. And was that the first time an industry member, sponsor, had become an executive director?
No. No, we've had directors drawn from our sponsors before.
Right. Before 2016?
Yes.
And who were they? Which organisations did they come from?
There were various directors from Arup, from Pilkington, I believe. I forget the rest now, I'm afraid.
Do sponsors have representation on the technical committee?
Yes.
They do. And again, during the period 2013 to 2017, can you identify any particular sponsors who had representative members of the technical committee?
all of our sponsors are eligible to be a part of the technical committee, and they all take up that position.
I see. You say all of them are eligible. Is qualification for the technical committee sponsorship?
So our technical committee comprises our sponsors and then invited industry experts.
I see. And is expertise in some area of facade engineering a requirement to sit on the technical committee in respect of those sponsors? Obviously, where they're experts, clearly, but where they're sponsors.
No, they have no. There are no specific requirements for a sponsor to sit on the technical committee.
I mean, for example, Stuart Taylor, Wintek, he was on the technical committee, wasn't he?
No, not
He wasn't.
No.
Right. Did the technical committee ever have somebody from NHBC on it?
No.
Do you know why that is the case?
I don't know.
Now, turning the page, please, to page 3, you explain in paragraph 11 that the CWCT is funded by membership subscriptions, sale of documents, and income from training. Can you just give us an idea of the total funding per annum of the CWCT, its gross revenue? And take the years 13 to 17.
Off the top of my head, a gross income of around 800,000, perhaps.
Right. And does the CWCT seek to remain independent from industry in the training and the guidance that it delivers?
Yes.
How does it do that?
By having a very broad membership and a broad set of sponsors, so we can provide objective guidance.
Right. So breadth. But did the CWCT have a set of principles governing impartiality which would prevent meetings being unduly influenced by one particular industry member? For example, a manufacturer of non-combustible insulation or a manufacturer of a combustible insulation?
We don't have any written rules that I'm aware of, but I'm also not aware of that situation ever arising.
Right. Now, you also say in the same paragraph, last sentence, the CWCT is also involved in delivering a university qualification in facade engineering. Is that the degree in facade engineering from Bath University?
That was the degree in facade engineering from Bath University. That course has now moved to the University of the West of England in Bristol.
Right. And how? Well, and is CWTC still involved in that degree course?
Yes.
I see. How? How is it involved?
We establish the curriculum and we do the majority of the teaching.
Do you personally, or have you personally delivered any courses?
Yes.
And on what subject?
On various subjects, including thermal performance, glass and glazing, acoustics, fire, materials.
So you've delivered lectures to students on that course on the fire performance of external cladding?
Yes.
Have you? And in what years did you do that?
2017 onwards.
After Grenfell?
Yes.
Right. Now, it's right, I think, to say that the CWCT has at least no formal regulatory standing. It's not a regulator, is it?
No, it's not.
No. But it has been involved in the development of British and European standards by representatives sitting on its committees.
Yes.
Yes. Do you know which British and European standards the CWCT was involved with?
We've been involved in the British Standard Committee for windows and doors. I'm not going to try and remember all the numbers of the various committees now. A European standard for covering curtain walling. A British Standard Committee on working at height, on general building codes, and I believe one on one of the fire committees for non-load bearing walls, I think. And this may have been before your time, Mr. Metcalfe, but was the CWCT involved with the harmonisation
of the reaction to fire standards of products which was carried out in the early 2000s?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. In paragraph 14, if we scroll down, please, page 3 to the bottom, you can see that you describe there what you say is limited involvement with the MHCLG. What was the nature of that involvement, limited though you say it was?
To my knowledge, it's as I say in my witness statement, we were involved in discussions around thermal performance prior to the revision of Part L in 2006.
Right. So, just to be clear, then, the nature of the involvement is limited by the matters that you then go on to set out.
Yes.
Right. I see. Now, was the CWCT ever involved in any aspects of the guidance in approved document B relating to external fire spread?
No.
No. Now, you describe also in your statement, and we'll come on to it in more detail later, but you describe Brian Martin from what was DCLG and then became MHCLG, attending 2 CWCT fire group meetings, one in July 2014 and one in March 2016. Were there any other occasions on which MHCLG was involved with the CWCT?
Not that certainly no other meetings that I can think of. We've had there's been some email communication, particularly since Grenfell, but no, nothing else specific. I mean,
during the period 2013 to 2017, was MHCLG or was CWCT involved with MHCLG in relation to the fire-related guidance that CWCT was putting out?
I'm sorry, could you?
Yeah, maybe try it differently. Were there occasions on which MHCLG was invited to participate in the guidance in relation to the fire performance of facades that CWCT was publishing?
Only the 2 meetings that you've...
Just the 2 meetings?
You've referred to, yes.
Right. Now, I want then to go back to your witness statement, please, at page 1, and look at your background and qualifications and your role. And at paragraph 3 on page 1, you say, I am the salaried director of the CWCT. I joined the CWCT after graduating from university in 2003. My full relevant qualifications are a BSc Physics from Birmingham University in 2003 and an MSc in Facade Engineering from Bath University in 2005. I'm also a member of the Society of Facade Engineering, SFE, and an SFE board member. And at paragraph 4 at the foot of the page, you say you became a director of CWCT in January 2014. I've held the roles of graduate engineer, senior engineer, and director. I've been involved in the CWCT Technical Committee since around 2008. Do you hold any specialist fire qualifications?
No.
In relation to the master's degree that you obtained in facade engineering, how detailed is that degree in relation to the fire safety of facades in particular?
At that time, I don't think fire was covered in any specific detail.
This is 2005?
Yes.
So this is before the amendments to approved document B published in April 2007?
Yes.
Have you had any first-hand experience of small-scale testing in relation to the individual components of facades, such as insulation, cladding panels?
No.
Have you any first-hand experience of large-scale full system tests under BS 8414 to the BR 135 criteria?
I've witnessed one 8414 test as a guest, and that's as far as that goes.
And which was that? Which product was that? Or products?
It was after Grenfell. It was I think mineral fibre insulation and aluminium cladding, as far as I can remember.
Right. Was that part of the government's testing?
No.
Right. And where was that test?
But it was at BRE.
Right. And who was the test sponsor?
I believe my invitation came from Nick Jenkins.
Of Booth Murie, as he demoed?
Then of Booth Murie.
Then of Booth Murie.
It may have been Euroclad at that point, or, yeah.
Right. How would you describe your knowledge of the building regulations and associated guidance in relation to external fire spread during the period 2013 to 2017?
Reasonably
Right.
good. We were asked to produce or to consider producing some additional guidance in relation to fire and the external wall in 2013. So certainly from that point onwards, I would have spent a lot of time looking at approved document B, and I think I understood the requirements quite well.
Right. And what kind of work did you undertake for the CWCT in your role as engineer and senior engineer?
So my early roles were focusing on building physics, as my background is in physics. As I progressed and became more experienced, I took on other roles as well.
What other roles?
So I wrote a document on built-up walls, for example, and other technical guidance documents, and technical notes that we've produced.
And what involvement did you have in those positions, engineer and senior engineer, in relation to the fire safety of facades over 18 metres, particularly?
None that I can recall.
Right. Now you're, I think, presently one of 4 directors at CWCT.
So no, I'm not a director. I am the director, if that makes sense. So I'm not a director in terms of company's house. I'm the company secretary, but I am my position is director.
I see. I follow. But you're company secretary.
Yes.
And there are 4 directors.
Yes.
In the company's house sense.
Yes.
Yes. And who are they?
They are, Richard White, who's our finance director, Clive Birch, Barry Smith, and Severio Passetto.
And Mr. White, Mr. Birch, and Mr. Smith, have they come from sponsors?
No, no, I don't think that they were in position as director before I think was even involved in CWCT, so that they are long-standing directors.
Right. And how did your role and responsibilities at the CWCT change, if they did change, when you became the salaried director in 2014?
Essentially, at that point, I'm responsible for the day-to-day running of the company and our training and publications.
Now, I want to ask you some questions about the technical committee responsible for guidance. If you go, please, to page 3 of your statement again and look at paragraph 13, you say this: as stated, our guidance is overseen by our technical committee comprising CWCT sponsors and invited industry experts. We collaborate more widely where specific expertise is required. We have been involved in various British and European standards committees over the years. Is it right that only sponsors and not ordinary members can sit on the technical committee?
So our technical committee comprises sponsors who have a right to be there as part of their sponsorship and invited experts. They may be from member companies. They're most likely to be from member companies.
Right, but ordinary members don't have a right, as it were, to sit on the technical committee.
That's correct.
I see. So, in essence, the sponsors buy the right to sit on that committee.
Yes.
And do these industry experts, do they sit on the technical committee permanently, or do they only, as it were, attend by invitation?
Generally, it's a permanent appointment.
Right. And have there been occasions when you've collaborated more widely than simply with these invited industry experts on a particular topic?
Yes. So for example, the meetings we had in 2014 and 2016 looking at providing guidance on in relation to fire, we invited people with specific expertise to those meetings.
Now, I'd like to look, please, with you at the 2008 CWCT guidance. We will pull that up in a moment. Let's have it up so that we can see what we're looking at. CWCT 5046, please. CWCT 5046. Now, that's the first page of it, and you'll note part 6 deals with fire performance. I put it on the screen really to prompt your memory. Were you in an engineering role at the CWCT when this document was published?
Yes.
And I think you were part of the CWCT technical committee from around 2008, but not, I think, is this right, involved in drafting this document?
That's correct.
But you're familiar with it, are you?
Yes.
Do you know who was its intended audience?
Anyone who has a role in specifying the performance of a building envelope.
So anyone from a main contractor down to a subcontractor, architect, designer.
Correct.
And was it aimed also at other bodies such as government or fire and rescue services?
No, not particularly.
Now, Alan Keeler tells us in his statement, and I don't think we need to turn it up, just for reference purposes, it's paragraph 8, page 2 in his statement, which is at CWCT 40119. He says that he was responsible for producing the draft of this document and wished to ensure that it was consistent with the guidance in the 2006 version of approved document B, published in the April of 2007. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
You say in your Met statement, again, no need to turn it up, it's page 7, that the CWCT ran courses on this document, including a presentation on fire. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were you involved at any time in delivering those courses?
No.
No. Who was?
I believe that would be Alan Keeler and Dr. Stephen Ledbetter, who was director of CWCT before me.
And how regular were those courses?
They would have been once a year.
Once a year. And who were they delivered to?
Anybody who wished to attend. So anyone from our membership and indeed the wider industry, non-members could attend courses as well.
I see. And they would have to pay, presumably?
Yes.
But members would get the service for free?
Members would get a discount.
As part of their membership?
They would get a discount as part of their membership.
Discount. Right, as part of their membership?
Yes.
Yes, I see. Now let's look at the guidance and see what recommendations it made for external cladding. We can see, as I've shown you already on the first page there, Part 6, Fire Performance. It's got 9 different parts, including a Part 0, which specifies checklist and certification. Can we go to page 3, please? On page 3, it says, at the top of the screen, this document was written by representative members of the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology. And at the bottom of the page, can you see at the bottom, you can see the sponsors of the document are listed, and it includes companies such as Arup, Pilkington, 2 you've already mentioned, Wintek, and the University of Bath. Yes?
Yes.
And also Cornea UK Limited. Who are they?
Cornea UK are manufacturers of aluminium windows, doors and curtain walling, so glazed facade systems.
Manufacturers, and do they have a sales role too?
They will sell their products to the industry, yes.
Will they sell other people's products?
No.
Right. If we go to page 4, you see that it says that this document was written under the guidance of the Centre for Window and Cladding Technical Committee, comprised of, and then standards, and then there's a pretty long list of those contributing. And you could see Alan Keeler and Stephen Ledbetter listed there, along with members of the BRE, Arup, Wintek, and a number of others, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, so this document was, is it fair to say, pretty broadly considered before it was published?
Yes.
If you go then to page 13 of this document, please, at the top of that page you'll see paragraph 6.4.2, surface spread of flame. And under 6.4.2.1 it says, external surface spread of flame, the external surface of the envelope shall satisfy the requirements for class 0 when tested in accordance with BS 476 parts 6 and 7 national class, or class B, S3, D2 or better in accordance with BS EN 153011 European class. For rain screen panels, this requirement applies to both the visible external surface of the panel and the surface of the panel facing the cavity. Now, at the time that this guidance was published in 2008, as I think you've confirmed, the 2006 version of ADB was current, And do you agree that it said in paragraph 12.6 and diagram 40, we can look at them if you like, that the external surfaces of walls were required to be class 0 or Euro class B, S3, D2 or better if above 18 metres?
Yes.
Yes. So the CWCT, just help me, the CWCT guidance here is essentially, is it, a repetition of the guidance contained in paragraph 12.6 of approved document B?
The guidance here goes further, I think.
How does it do that?
So the guidance here says that the external surface of the envelope shall satisfy the requirements for class 0. That applies regardless of height of the building or distance to the boundary. So it differs from the requirements of 12.6 and diagram 40, which has different requirements depending on the height of the building and position relative to the boundary.
I see. So you say this guidance was going to apply to a building that wasn't a high-rise as well as those that were?
That's my understanding of it. Yes.
Right. Now, at any event, these paragraphs were not advising, were they, that external cladding, the rain screen materials or product, when used over 18 metres, was required to be a material or materials of limited combustibility?
No.
No. If we go to page 15, final paragraph on that page, paragraph 6.6.2 at the foot of the page, you can see it says this with the heading insulation materials. Insulation in walls of buildings with a story more than 18 metres above ground level should be of limited combustibility. So is this right, looking at this document and your understanding of it? Although cladding panels were required to be class 0 national or class Euro class B, I'll use a shorthand.
Yes.
Insulation, by contrast, had to be materials of limited combustibility.
When used in a building with a story more than 18 metres above ground level.
Yes, but that's how you always understood it, is it?
Yes.
Yes. Let's look at page 16, paragraph 6.6.3, composite components. And it says this: when one of the cladding elements is a composite of two or more materials mechanically jointed, bonded or fused together, the elements as a whole must demonstrate the appropriate fire performance. Similarly, it must be demonstrated that the composite will remain reasonably whole and not become prematurely separated from the building or framework. Now, looking at the first sentence together, Mr. Metcalfe, can you explain what was intended by it?
Not just by looking at the first sentence. I think the final paragraph in blue italics, I think, describes what was meant by that paragraph. So it's referring to composite insulation panels rather than composite panels more generally, is how I understand that paragraph.
Composite insulation panels.
Yes.
You say. Why do you say that?
The final paragraph in blue says that those metal-faced insulated panels designed for use in building envelopes can normally demonstrate satisfactory performance. So,
right.
So my understanding of this is that this is referring to composite insulation panels that might be used as a support, as a back wall or a support for a rain screen cladding system on the outside.
Right. Just two things. First of all, the blue italics, for those reading this document, are intended to be essentially guidance.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So this is guidance about the guidance.
Yes.
Yes. Secondly, you say that that second paragraph there, where it's referring to metal-faced insulated panels, are you referring there to foil-faced panels of insulation material, which are PIR, PUR, or phenolic?
No. So this would be panels that metal-faced panels, so skins of aluminium or steel with insulation between them that are designed to form the wall structure.
The wall structure. Which part of the wall structure?
So if we're referring to a rain screen, it would be the back wall, the part of the wall that supports the outer cladding. So it'd be an alternative to an SFS system, for example.
I see. Now, the guidance goes on, as you just pointed out, to identify metal-faced insulated panels. Where it refers to metal-faced insulated panels, you've just said it's the part of the wall that supports the outer cladding. I'm just trying to get that clear in my mind. Is that referring to the rain screen panels, or is it referring to some other part of the external wall build-up?
My understanding is it's not referring to the rain screen panels because they're not insulated.
Right.
It's the supporting structure for the rain screen cladding.
I think it might help perhaps other people listening or watching this if you could just explain the distinction between what you referred to as SFS panels and some other form of structure.
Sure. Okay. So SFS stands for steel frame system.
Yeah.
So it is used to typically as an infill wall between floor slabs. So you'll have steel studs, and they will be lined on either side with a board material. And on that board material, you attach your brackets, your insulation, and your rain screen cladding on the outside. So that's a typical way of constructing now. You could also form that back wall with bricks or blocks or masonry, or indeed insulated composite panels.
I see. And so where it is an insulated composite panel, it may itself have a metal facing like a foil.
No, it would be a thicker gauge of metal. It wouldn't just be a foil. It would be an aluminium or steel sheet.
Is there or was there any specific guidance in this document? Well, I'm sorry, before I ask that question, where it says in the blue italics, can normally demonstrate satisfactory performance, what do you mean by, or what is meant by that? Performance in what sense?
I assume that to mean that those panels can be designed so that they don't delaminate and don't unduly spread fire.
I mean, is that reaction to fire or some other fire performance standard inherent or expressed in the rules?
My understanding is that would be reaction to fire. I believe in this standard we don't cover fire resistance.
Was there any specific guidance in this document which advised that there ought to be limitations on the use of ACM panels over 18 metres?
No.
This document, take it from me, does not mention the word filler or the phrase filler material or the phrase filler material, etc. anywhere, does it?
No.
No. Do you know, from your own knowledge, whether the authors of this document were aware, and I use the word aware advisedly, let me try it differently. Do you know whether the authors of this document thought that the 2006 version of ADB contained the word filler in 12.7 for a particular reason?
I don't know.
Now, we know, as you've confirmed, that the 2006 version of Approved Document B came into effect in April 2007, so before this guidance. Let's look at that. That's CLG 1607, page 95, please. And if you look at 12.6 at the very bottom right-hand side, it says external wall construction is the title to the part of this section of ADB, and external surfaces at the very bottom. 12.6, the external surfaces of walls should meet the provisions in diagram 40. And then if we go back to page 96, stay on page 96 and go on, please, to the next paragraph. It says 12.7, insulation materials stroke products. In a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation product, filler material, brackets not including gaskets, sealants and similar, close brackets, etc., used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility, see Appendix A. This restriction does not apply to masonry cavity wall construction, which complies with diagram 34 in section 9. Now, there's nothing in the CWCT document that advises that anything other than insulation should be of limited combustibility in external walls over 18 metres, is there?
No.
No. And in the CWCT's view, this document, is this right? This document was consistent with the guidance that we've just looked at in approved document B at the time of its publication?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, to your knowledge, did you ever hear anybody say, but this is before 2014, that the 2008 CWCT guidance was inconsistent with approved document B generally or specifically paragraph 12.7?
No.
No. Now let's turn to CWCT Technical Note 73. This is 2011. Let's start with that, Mr. Metcalfe, with your statement, please, at page 4, paragraph 15. Yes, and you say there, under the heading Insulation Materials and Products and Approved Document B, paragraph 12.7, I understand that the inquiry is considering approved document B, and in particular paragraph 12.7, approved document B, volume 2, 2006 edition, and you give a reference for that. I cannot say for certain when I first became aware of this paragraph, but I suspect it was in 2010, 2011, when CWCT were preparing a technical note, TN 73, Fire Performance of Curtain Walls and Rain Screens, published March 2011. My understanding of this paragraph was that it required insulation and filler materials to achieve class A2, S3, D2 when used in an external wall of a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground. The term filler in the paragraph was not defined and was not a term commonly used in the facade industry. Its meaning was therefore not obvious. From the list of materials given that were excluded from this requirement, gaskets, sealants and similar, it could perhaps be assumed that a filler was a material that was used to fill a gap between components or elements. However, this was not clear from the wording of the clause. This issue is at the heart of much of this statement. Now, your colleague, Alan Keeler, says in his witness statement, if we go to that, please, at CWCT 40119, page 3, paragraph 5. I'll just have it up in front of you. And at 6 to 7, he explained, and I'm summarising, that he drafted the CWCT guidance that you've referred to, namely Technical Note 73. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And he also says that it was reviewed by CWCT's technical group and selected fire experts before it was published. Is that right too?
Yes.
Yes. Do you know who was on the CWCT technical group at the time of the publication of Technical Note 73 who reviewed it?
Not off the top of my head, I don't know.
And do you know who the selected fire experts were?
I believe we had comments from AECOM, who are consultants and have fire engineering knowledge, from Pilkington, from Rockwool, and there's another company whose name I forget, I'm afraid.
Right. Now, our expert, the inquiries expert, Jonathan Sackula, who was the facade engineering expert who was given evidence to the inquiry, has said this in his expert's report. I'll just show you. It's JOS 701, page 5, paragraph 18. He says this: the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, based in Bath, UK, is the main technical umbrella organisation for facade technology in the UK. I would expect all cladding contractors to have been aware of the contents of the CWCT standard for systemised building envelopes in detail, and to have been aware of the subjects covered by the CWCT technical notes, reading specific notes as required. For example, Technical Note 73, Fire Performance of Curtain Walls and Rain Screens, was published in March 2011 and gives an important summary. This applies particularly to those contractors who were members of the CWCT. Do you agree with what Mr. Sackler has said there?
Yes.
So you accept that this was important guidance, the 2011 guidance, relied upon by industry, or at least guidance that should have been relied upon by industry, in his opinion?
Yes.
Now let's look at it. Let's look at Technical Note 73. It's at CWCT 5019. And that's the first page. It says at the top, Technical Note 73, Fire Performance of Curtain Walls and Rain Screens. The opening words say, curtain walls are normally used for areas of the building envelope that are not required to be fire resisting, but they still require appropriate detailing to limit the spread of fire. This technical note reviews the aspects relating to fire performance that generally need to be considered in the design of facades that are not required to be fire resisting. Where the facade is required to be fire resisting, additional requirements will apply. Now, if we go then to page 6, please, left-hand column, you'll see a heading, Use of Combustible Material. Do you see?
Yes.
And it says, as in the second paragraph down, to satisfy the recommendations in ADB, insulation and filler materials in walls of a building with a floor more than 18 metres above ground level are required to be of limited combustibility. This requirement does not apply to sealants and gaskets, and there is an exception for insulation in the cavity of masonry walls. Similar requirements apply in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And the next paragraph down says, the Scottish Handbook also requires every part of an external wall not more than 1 metre from a boundary to be constructed of non-combustible products. Was it your understanding, when CWCT was preparing this technical note, that in England and Wales, the only materials that were required to be of limited combustibility in order to satisfy approved document B were insulation and, quotes, filler materials, unquotes?
Yes.
Yes. And that was in contrast, was it, with the Scottish regulations, which required every part of the external wall to be constructed of non-combustible products?
Yes.
Yes. Did that difference strike you at the time?
At the time, no.
No. So can we take it that you didn't yourself at least turn your mind to why that difference might be there?
No.
To your knowledge, did anybody discuss or consider this potential difference?
I don't recall any discussions of that nature.
Now, there's no definition given in the technical note or any hint or guidance in it about what filler materials are, is there?
No.
Why is that?
We didn't know what filler materials were.
Did anybody raise the question, internally at least?
I don't recall any discussions. I'm sure we would have discussed it, and I don't know what we would have discussed.
Right. When it says filler materials in walls of buildings, can you help us about what the CWCT was intending by that phrase?
This was essentially just copying what was in approved document B, paragraph 12.7.
Right. So, without turning your mind to what it actually meant?
As I said, I'm sure we did discuss the meaning of filler materials, but I don't know what
Right.
was discussed. I don't recall doing that.
So you, just to be clear, you don't recall any specific discussions within the CWCT about the meaning or intent of the phrase filler materials?
At that time, no.
No. Do you know whether it was intended that the phrase filler materials in walls of buildings would at least include the core of an ACM panel, so that at least the core of an ACM panel would have to be a material of limited combustibility if used over 18 metres?
That wasn't our interpretation.
You say that wasn't your interpretation. did you turn your mind to it? Did CWCT turn its mind to that question?
At that point, I don't know.
Because you say that wasn't our interpretation. Does that tell us that you did have an interpretation, but that wasn't it?
As I said, when this was written in 2010, published 2011, I don't recall those discussions.
I see.
Subsequently, we discussed it at great length in preparation of our technical note 98. But that was later.
Yeah, that was later. That was, to be clear, I think April 17, but there were previous discussions, in fact, in 14 and 16, and we'll come to.
Yes.
Do you know whether anybody within the CWCT membership took this phrase or any part of the phrase filler materials, etc., to denote that the entire external wall build-up had to be of materials of limited combustibility?
I'm not aware of anyone having that interpretation.
Do you know whether there were any discussions with officials from government, DCLG in particular, at this time about the meaning of the term filler before this guidance was published in March 2011?
I don't think there was.
You don't think there was? So
CWCT didn't discuss it with DCLG, as far as I'm aware.
No. Now, and after the publication of this guidance, do you remember whether any queries were received by CWCT about the meaning of the term filler materials in this note and what it applied to?
I don't recall any specific inquiries around the time of the publication of this note, although, as I'm sure we'll talk about later on, when it came to our further guidance, then there were issues around that definition.
But let's keep with this the document for the time being. If you look at the final paragraph on the left-hand side on page 6, you can see that there's a heading, Alternative Approaches. And it says, for rain screen walls, ADB allows fire testing in accordance with BS 8414 to be used instead of providing cavity barriers and non-combustible insulation as described above. Is that section correct, in your view?
Yes, I think so. ADB, I think paragraph 12.5 says you either follow the prescriptive requirements given in the following paragraphs, or you can carry out a test in accordance with 8414 and classify in accordance with BR 135.
Is testing to BS 8414 an alternative to the provision of cavity barriers?
It could be.
Now, the reference to non-combustible insulation is not in line with the guidance in 12.7, is it?
No, 12.7 refers to limited combustibility.
Indeed. Exactly. Can you explain that discrepancy?
I can't explain that. The only thing I can say is my understanding is that non-combustible, in Scotland, non-combustible was considered to include materials of limited combustibility, so we may have fallen into that trap, I don't know.
Do you, sitting there now, accept that indicated that the existence of that discrepancy in a document in respect of which a lot of experts had input, indicate that even the best industry experts didn't fully grasp some basic concepts and terms in approved document B?
No, I don't accept that.
Why not?
I think this is an oversight. I don't know why that wasn't picked up, but I don't think that means that we weren't aware of the issues,
right.
and those people reviewing this document weren't aware of the issues.
You say it's an oversight and not picked up. It's quite an important one, isn't it? To fudge the difference between non-combustible and limited combustible.
I can't explain why that's happened, I'm afraid.
Looking at the top of the right-hand column, it goes on, and we'll have to scroll back up to the top of the page. Where testing is carried out in accordance with BS 8414, the test applies to the complete cladding system, including insulation, rain screen, flashings, and cavity barriers. Changing any of these components may affect the ability of the wall to resist the spread of fire. Now, can you help us how well that particular point was understood in the industry? Specifically, whether the industry really grasped the fact that a large-scale 8414 test applied only to the specific system tested?
I don't know. I think we make it quite clear there. I think the standard makes it quite clear. Evidence that you've heard suggests that the industry didn't understand that.
The reason I ask you is because it appears that the second edition of BR 135, published in 2003, did not, at least in terms, spell this point out, whereas the edition published in 2013, the third edition, did. But can you help whether the industry knew that principle, notwithstanding that it wasn't written in expressly into BR 135?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No. We say it very clearly in this note.
You do? Did you ever become aware of anyone within the cladding industry not understanding that?
Not at this time, no.
When did you first realise?
I think only since Grenfell.
Right. Now let's turn then to 2013. And I want to ask you about two CWCT board meetings in that year, one on the 24th of July and one on the 18th of September. We can see that the topic of combustible insulation was brought to CWCT's attention on two occasions in that year. Let's look at the first of the meetings, CWCT 5037, and we can see this was the meeting of the 24th of July 2013, and those who are present are listed. Chris Macy of Wintek was there, as well as Brenda Apted of CWCT, Stephen Ledbetter, and you, yes?
Yes.
And some industry people too. Were all those in attendance members of the CWCT board? By which I mean Brenda Apted, Stephen Ledbetter, and you.
Yes. Well, Brenda Apted was office manager, so she was there to take notes and take minutes.
Right.
Stephen Ledbetter was the director. I was taking over from Stephen as director, so
Right.
I attended as well.
Now, we can see the other names you've mentioned. We can see Barry Smith of Atkins, who was one of the, I think, the long-standing directors, yes?
Yes.
And we get, if you look at the apologies list, we can see Clive Birch from Bureau 4, yes?
Yes.
He was the other, I think, long-standing director whose name you gave us.
Yep.
But there are others there who are also present, so Jeff Mann, Phil King from Arup, and John Stamp from Cornea. Were they directors?
But they were sponsors.
But not directors?
Jeff Mann was a director,
Right.
and the others were sponsors.
And we can see other names under the apologies: Stephen Wilde, Ailish McShane, Stuart Moxon, and Jim Rowley. Were they directors or were they sponsors entitled to be present?
They were sponsors.
Right. And was their role at the board one of observer, to take notes and know what's going on, perhaps to contribute to the discussions, or were they actually there to make decisions on behalf of CWCT Services Limited, the company, whose board meeting this was?
Sorry, can you rephrase that, please?
Yes. As directors, or those present at board meetings, were those people who were not company's house directors, was their role to attend, observe, and contribute, or were they there to make corporate decisions?
They were there to contribute in whatever discussions we were having.
Right. Did they ever make any decisions as members of the board on behalf of CWCT Services Limited?
Not specifically, I don't think. That they would advise, as I said before, they would potentially bring ideas and suggestions to the board for discussion, and if it was deemed within the group that those issues required further discussion or further clarity, then we would take that away from the meeting and consider it further.
Now, we can see that Chris Macy of Wintek was there. Can we go to page 2 of this document? Point 7, any other business. CM, that's Chris Macy, raised concerns about misunderstandings regarding insulation as Class 0 does not meet fire regulations. SRL, I think that's Stephen Ledbetter,
yes,
agreed to look into this. and you told us Stephen Ledbetter was a director. Was this the first occasion on which you personally became aware of concerns about the use of combustible insulation and fire performance?
Yes.
Do you recall whether others at the meeting were previously aware, or was this the first time for them too, so far as you could tell?
I don't recall anybody necessarily agreeing with what Chris Macy said or disagreeing. Chris brought this issue to the board's attention and we agreed to look at it further.
Right. Just help me with the words here. Misunderstandings regarding insulation as class 0 does not meet the fire regulations. What, I'm just trying to understand what it means. Does that mean that the concerns that were, well, you tell me, what were the concerns?
I believe that we were told that certain materials that didn't achieve limited combustibility but were instead class 0 were being used in tall buildings.
Thank you. Do you know what Stephen Ledbetter did by way of looking into this as he agreed to?
We went back and discussed the issue at the office in Bath, and then we took the issue to our technical committee later in the, introduced it to our technical committee later in the year, I think.
Right. Now, if we go, is that the CWCT board meeting in September? Or was it a separate meeting, a separate technical committee meeting?
I don't know if I don't know if it was discussed at the September technical committee meeting or the November technical committee meeting.
I see. I follow. And what was the outcome of Stephen Ledbetter's investigation?
It was simply that we would discuss it with the technical committee to try and understand the issues better and to see what guidance we might need to provide.
Yes. Now let's go to the minutes for the September 2013 board meeting, CWCT 5028. You can see the date, 18th of September 2013. The list of those present includes you, apologies from various people. And if you go into that list of apologies, you can see that neither Stephen Ledbetter nor Chris Macy were there, because they're apologising for not being there, yes?
Yes.
Now, if we look at the heading under paragraph 3, please, on that page towards the bottom of your screen, matters arising. The matter of fire performance raised by Chris Macy is to be referred to the technical group. Building control has a huge problem with insulation materials, and we should perhaps write a technical update. Can you recall who in particular spoke about this at the meeting, if neither Chris Macy nor Stephen Ledbetter were present?
I don't know.
Who was it who believed that building control had a, quotes, huge problem, unquotes, with the fire performance of insulation materials? Do you know?
I don't know. I can only assume that was what Chris Macy told us previously.
Were you aware of this problem at the time yourself from other sources?
No.
Now, given that 2 months had elapsed since the problem was first brought to the attention of the CWCT board, and Stephen Ledbetter had agreed to look into it, can you help about what it was that had been discovered, if anything, by this time, September 2013?
Nothing specific that I'm aware of. As I said, I think we agreed to raise the issue with our technical committee.
Yes, and who was on the technical committee to whom this problem was referred?
To the group as a whole. We would have put together a short paper outlining some issues. We would have presented that to the technical committee and invited discussion and comment. And
was anything achieved on this problem, this difficulty issue before the CWCT meeting in July 2014?
My understanding is that the conclusion of discussions with the technical committee was that this was a complex issue, and we needed to talk to fire experts as well as facade experts, and we should arrange separate meetings to do that, and that's where the July meeting in 2014 came about.
Right. Now, just exploring that a little bit, you said this was a complex issue. What precisely was the complex issue that needed the assistance of fire experts and facade experts?
I believe it was the interpretation of the prescriptive route to compliance in general, so not just insulation, but cladding and the cladding panels, and what exactly approved document B said with respect to those materials used in the external wall.
Right. Because looking at the two board minutes we've seen in 2013, the breadth of the problem you've just identified is not apparent, is it?
No.
I mean, it looks as if all that is being discussed at that stage is the class, what I might call the class naught problem, namely that industry thought that class naught meant limited combustibility. Is that fair?
I think the problem that was brought to our attention was associated with insulation. With our knowledge and understanding of other issues around fire performance, we then wanted to look at other issues as well, including the cladding and not just the insulation.
Right. Now tell me if this is unfair or wrong, but did it work like this, that Chris Macy brought the problem to you as a specific problem, namely that people think that people are misunderstanding class naught, and then the more you looked into it with approved document B, the more you thought there were questions that needed to be investigated?
That seems reasonable.
Is that a fair characterisation of the history?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn next to the July meeting. This is a little bit early, uncharacteristically, to ask for the break, but we're making good progress, so would it be a convenient moment?
Yes, all right. Well, we're going to have a break during the morning anyway. We normally have it a little bit later, but that doesn't matter. We'll take it now. We'll stop now. We'll resume at 11:30, please. And I have to ask you now, you've started giving your evidence. Please not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it while you're out of the room.
Okay.
All right? Thanks so much. Would you go to the usher then?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Millett. 11:30. Thank you. you ask Mr. Metcalfe to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Metcalfe, all ready to carry on?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Metcalfe, I want to ask you now about a meeting of the CWCT, which took place a year later on the 2nd of July 2014. And the minutes of the meeting are, please, at CLG 3019336. Now, there they are. Fire Group is the heading. You say in your statement, it's paragraph 21 at page 5, no need to look at it unless you want to, that you do say that this minute is an accurate representation of the meeting, but doesn't record that Brian Martin of DCLG wasn't present for the entirety of it. Is that fair?
That's correct, yes.
Right. You say that your recollection is that he was present at the start of the meeting but left before the end. I think is that right?
Yes.
Could it have been the other way round, that he arrived late and did stay till the end, rather than arriving at the start and leaving early?
No, that was originally what was going to happen, but he, I think, sent me an email shortly before the meeting saying his plans had changed, so he can now attend the first part, but would have to leave before the end.
I follow. Now, if we look at the minutes, we can see at the top that the meeting took place at 2 p.m. at the offices of Arup in Fitzroy Street, central London, at that time. That was, of course, before Zoom or any other sort of platform like that. So am I right in saying that many of the attendees would have had to have travelled at least possibly some distance for this meeting, yourself included?
Yes.
I mean, you would have had to have come up from Bath?
Yes.
Yes. Can we take it from that the meetings weren't generally convened by CWCT with attendees from DCLG and BRE unless it was considered necessary and important?
Yes.
Whose decision was it to convene that meeting?
This is the result of the discussions that we had with the CWCT Technical Committee in late 2013. It was decided at that point that we needed to convene a meeting specifically to talk about fire, and this is the result of that discussion. Right,
and we can see underneath the list of those who attended that it included Brian Martin of DCLG, Sarah Colwell of the BRE, yes?
Yes.
It also included Ivor Meredith of Kingspan, didn't it?
Yes.
Yes, and Luke Bisbee and Dr. Barbara Lane as well.
Yes.
From their respective institutions, and I think you chaired the meeting.
Yes.
Now, did you take minutes?
I took some notes. My colleague Alan Keeler also took some notes, and then we combined them when we got back to the office to form the minutes.
Right. And did you send the minutes in draft to the attendees to confirm that the contents of the draft was correct?
We sent the minutes to the attendees and those who sent their apologies and asked for comments. Yes.
Yes, I see. And did you get back from those people any comments and corrections which led to any changes?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. Now, if we look at point 2, background, to the bottom of your screen, it says this: CWCT receives inquiries about fire performance of facades, and a number of issues have been raised recently. This meeting has been convened to explore some of these issues and determine what action CWCT should take to assist the industry. Now, you say in your statement, and it's paragraph 24, page 6, no need to see it unless you want to, that you can't recall any specific inquiries. Does that remain the position as at today?
Yes.
Yes. So you can't remember what specifically had been raised before this meeting?
I don't recall specific inquiries. However, the discussions that we had and the agenda that we put together for this meeting would have reflected those inquiries that we had received in terms of the broad topics that were discussed.
Right. And are the broad topics reflected in the headings that we see?
Yes, I believe so. Combustibility, cavity barriers, fire stops, and so on.
Well, let's look at your statement at page 6, please, paragraph 22, top of page 6. You say, prior to the 2nd July 2014, I recall there being some general uncertainty over the word filler and exactly what it referred to, but I do not recall any specific discussions or examples. Now, was that uncertainty over the meaning of the word filler a reference to the word filler in 12.7?
Yes.
Of ADB, it was. And was that uncertainty over the meaning of the word filler in 12.7 one of the issues that had been raised before this meeting?
I believe so.
When did you first become aware of that issue?
I don't know.
I ask you because we don't see it, at least specifically, in the minutes of the 24th of July 2013 board meeting or the board meeting of the 18th of September. In both cases 2013, do we?
No.
So can we take it from that the issue, problem, controversy, if you like, about the meaning of the word filler was something that arose in CWCT's mind between September 2013 and July 2014?
That's a possibility. We may. It's very difficult to say exactly. As we discussed previously, the issue raised at our board meeting was specifically about insulation, and then, as it was deemed that we needed to discuss these issues further, we put together additional issues that we wanted to discuss. I don't have a timeline for those inquiries, I'm afraid.
Can you remember whether there was a particular person or group or member of CWCT who had raised this problem?
No.
Was the problem about what filler meant one of the reasons, if not the reason, the meeting was convened?
It was one of the issues that we wanted to try and establish. It certainly wasn't the only issue, but it was I think a key discussion point.
A key discussion point. Now let's look, please, at CLG 3031072. This is an email run from the April of 2014. And if we look at page 1 towards the foot of the page, or middle of the page, it's an email from Brenda Apted to Brian Martin at DCLG, as it then was, of the 24th of April 2014. And she writes as follows. Dear Mr. Martin, CWCT currently provides guidance on fire performance. In Technical Note 73, fire performance of curtain walls and rain screens, copy attached. This explains the requirements of the building regulations and suggests how these requirements can be satisfied. We have had numerous inquiries in recent months regarding fire and facades. Issues that have been raised include, and then there's a long list of bullet points. You can see the first one, use of combustible insulation in facades, particularly rain screens. This is causing problems due to the greater thickness of insulation that is required if limited combustibility materials have to be used. And then you see the fourth bullet point down, performance of composite panels such as ACMs. You see that?
Yes.
And then there are others as well. And then you go on to say, we propose to hold a meeting to discuss the issues of fire and facades to get a wider industry view, establish the adequacy / appropriateness of its existing regulations, establish whether alternative solutions are available, establish what action CWCT should take. Depending on the outcome of the meeting, we will propose to establish a working group to oversee the development of CWCT work in this area. The working group would be drawn from those present at the initial meeting, but may include others with specialist knowledge if appropriate. And then if we turn the page, we would like to invite you to our initial meeting, a half-day meeting in central London. We would be grateful if you could let us know you would like to be involved by Monday, 12th May, and we can then go ahead and arrange a meeting. Now, does that jog your memory about the issues that had been raised with and within CWCT that were intended to be addressed at the meeting?
It highlights the issues, yes.
And do you remember any discussion with Brenda Apted or involving Brenda Apted that led to that list being created?
I would have drafted this email that Brenda sent, so I put that list together. Right.
So does that tell us, if we look back at page 1, please, that the 4 discussion points towards the foot of the screen, based on the longer list of bullet points above it, were all issues of which you were aware by that time, April 2014.
Yes.
Right. Including combustible insulation in facades and the performance of composite panels such as ACMs.
Yes.
Yeah. And can you remember what was it about the performance of composite panels such as ACMs that had arisen which prompted you to put that as one of the items as an issue in the list?
I think by that point there had been fires, particularly in the Middle East, where ACMs had been suggested as a cause of fire spread, and we wanted to understand those issues, understand if they were issues here as well, and see what guidance needed to be provided.
Right. Had that come from within the CWCT, or had it come from a sponsor or group of sponsors or any particular sector of industry?
My recollection is that in a meeting of a separate group looking at other work that we were doing, the issue of ACMs was mentioned to us by Nick Jenkins of Booth Murray, sometime in mid to late 2013, I think.
Yes. I see. So it was building on that as well.
Yes.
Right. Were you aware at this time that there were different types of ACM panels in the context of fire performance, some having a polyethylene core, but some being advertised as fire-resistant panels, FR?
I don't recall exactly what I knew at that point, but I certainly would have done some research prior to this meeting and likely found out those things, yes.
Right. Can you remember whether there was a consistent industry view about the safety, the relative safety of FR panels as opposed to 100% PE cored ACM panels?
I don't think we'd really had those discussions at that point.
Do you remember whether there was any discussion about what proportion of mineral content was required before an FR panel could be considered acceptable to meet the functional requirement in Regulation B4 of the building regulations?
No.
Were you familiar with the dangers that ACM with 100% PE cored panels posed on tall buildings before this meeting?
As I said, that there had been fires around the world where it had been reported that ACM, polyethylene called ACMs, had been used, and we didn't know any specific details about those buildings other than what was recorded in the press, and we wanted to understand those concerns by discussing them with industry and experts.
You refer to fires in the Middle East. What about fires before that? For example, the Mermoz Tower in Roubaix in May 2012.
Yes, we were aware of that fire as well.
And then the fires in the Middle East, those the UAE fires?
Yes.
Yes. And I think there are 5 of those between January 2012 and April 2013.
I don't know the exact details,
Right.
but there were a number of fires at that time, yes.
Okay. Now, going back to Brenda Apted's email, looking at the second bullet point, please, if we can, under the list of issues to discuss, establish the adequacy or appropriateness of existing regulations. Which regulations were you referring to there?
I think that was really reference to the statutory guidance, the guidance given in approved document B.
Was there any particular problem with the adequacy and appropriateness of approved document B raised by any member of CWCT before this meeting, or before you penned or drafted this email?
I don't recall any specific examples again, but I believe there were concerns around Clause 12.7 and exactly what it included and what it didn't. Right.
So that second bullet point, just to summarise your evidence, is this right? It was directed to the, in your mind, emerging controversy about what filament?
Yes.
And perhaps more broadly, the ambit of 12.7.
Yes.
Yes. Now let's get back to the minutes of the 2nd of July meeting, if we can, please. Page 1, item 4. You'll see there that there's an open discussion. If we go, please, to page 1, item 4, open discussion, foot of your screen. Comments have been grouped under relevant headings and are not necessarily in the order in which they were made. If we look at page 3, in the light of that general caveat, page 3, we can see in the middle of the page there's a heading, combustibility of insulation. You see that?
Yes.
And it says this: limited combustibility insulation should be used above 18 metres when following the prescriptive requirements of ADB clause 12.7, but other materials, principally foil-faced phenolic foam, are often used in rain screen walls. There is a degree of ignorance, with some people confusing Class 0 with limited combustibility. In other cases, building control officers are permitting the use of Class 0 materials, making it difficult for cladding consultants to enforce the requirement for limited combustibility insulation. Now, first, can you remember who it was who explained that foil-faced phenolic foam was often used in rain screen walls?
I think that was our experience from inquiries that we'd received from members, and that's our understanding of what was being done at the time.
Do you remember whether a specific product was mentioned in relation to that?
I don't recall a specific product.
Was everyone at the meeting clear that phenolic foams were not materials of limited combustibility?
Yes.
Yes. Was it ever made clear exactly who it was who was confusing Class 0 with limited combustibility? You say some people. Who are the people?
I think there was a general confusion. I don't think I could say it's any particular group of people within the industry. I think there was general confusion around the different terminology that was used, the different tests that were used to establish the performance of different materials.
Were you, with your expertise in this field to that date, surprised that some people were confusing Class 0 with limited combustibility?
Yes.
Did the some people include building control officers?
I don't think we had heard that directly.
Right. Just pausing here in the discussion, do you remember whether Ivor Meredith, who was there from Kingspan, as I pointed out to you, did he join in the discussion on this?
I don't recall any specific inputs from Ivor Meredith.
I mean, to be clear, did he agree with you that there were some people confusing Class 0 with limited combustibility?
I don't recall.
Going on with the next paragraph, it says this: higher standards of thermal insulation are requiring greater thicknesses of insulation, and in some cases this can only be achieved within the designated wall zone by use of combustible insulation. Architects are unaware of the problem and need to allow a wider wall zone to accommodate the greater thickness required with limited combustibility material. Now, looking at those paragraphs, that's exactly the same issue, isn't it, that was raised with the CWCT board in the July and the September of 2013, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, that issue would have been raised by at the board meeting.
Yes, and can you help about why no progress had been made or appears to have been made in relation to these topics? So confusion between Class 0 and limited combustibility and the use of combustible insulation in contravention or apparent contravention of 12.7 of ADB.
It took time to arrange this meeting. I became CWCT director in January of 2014, so there was personally a lot of stuff going on at that time as I got to grips with that role, and therefore it took slightly longer than planned to arrange this meeting.
Right. You've said in your statement, let's go to it, paragraph 26 on page 7, and we'll come back to this note in a moment. Let's just look across at this. You say there, I do not have any specific recollections of this section of the meeting. It's the section we've just been referring to. The use of combustible insulation had previously been raised by Chris Macy at a CWCT board meeting, and this discussion was intended to help us gain a better understanding of this and other potential fire-related issues. I do not think that Brian Martin was present during this discussion, as he did not attend the whole meeting. I do not recall who specifically stated that, quotes, other materials, principally foil-faced phenolic foam, are often used in rain screen walls. I did not know if combustible insulation was being widely used. However, I would not have reason to doubt what we were being told. Foil-faced phenolic foam was principally a reference to Kingspan K15. My understanding was that foam-based insulation products in general were combustible. This would include foil facade phenolic foam. So does that help you with your recollection about whether specific products were mentioned in the context of foil-faced phenolic foam?
Yes.
To be clear, Kingspan K15.
They were the market leader, yes.
Right. Any others?
I don't recall if the likes of Celotex were mentioned at the time.
Right. I mean, to help you with the chronology, Celotex didn't launch RS 5000 until the August of the same year, the following month.
Okay.
But had CWCT looked into the use of combustible insulation after the warnings raised by Chris Macy of Wintek in the July of the previous year?
No.
No. Why is that? Was it again just lapse of time?
Yes.
Given that members of Kingspan were present at the meeting, including Ivor Meredith, who had had a role in the large-scale fire testing of K15 historically, do you remember whether any comments were made by him or anybody else about K15 and its widespread use?
No, I don't recall such comments.
Were you yourself clear at the time of this meeting that any insulation product used over 18 metres was required to be of limited combustibility?
That was clearly the requirement if following the prescriptive route to compliance.
Yes. And the alternative to following the prescriptive route to compliance was what?
Testing the facade system in accordance with BS 8414 and classifying it in accordance with BR 135, or I think alternatively fire engineering in more general terms was mentioned as a route, an alternative route to compliance as well.
Was Ivor Meredith himself asked any questions about the fire performance of K15?
Not that I recall.
So he wasn't asked to clarify in what instances it could be used?
No. As I said, it was, to us, it was clear when it couldn't be used.
Right. I mean, there's all this discussion about foil-faced phenolic foam happening in front of Ivor Meredith. I mean, can you remember any contribution, one way or the other, that he made to the debate?
No.
Right. Now, was there any discussion at all about the exception in 12.7, which accepts the use of insulation in cavity masonry walls? Do you remember that?
I don't recall that being discussed.
Right.
This was about insulation in rain screen cavities, so that wasn't really relevant to the discussion we were having.
Right. Thank you. Now, it would have been possible, wouldn't it, to add a warning about the inappropriate use of combustible insulation in tall buildings into the technical update? Technical update 73.
I don't think. We could have done that. I think Technical Note 73 made it clear that limited combustibility insulation was required, and mineral fibre insulation was the only commonly used material that met that requirement.
Was there a specific consideration of adding a rider or amendment to Technical Note 73 to make it crystal clear that only materials of limited combustibility could be used above 18 metres?
No, that wasn't discussed. It was fairly quickly established that a new technical note would be written that would cover these issues.
Oh, I see. So this was that was in contemplation as a result of this meeting, was it?
Yes.
I follow. Now, looking back, please, at the note of the minutes, the note of the meeting, the minutes of the meeting, under the heading Combustibility of Insulation, which is where we were, you see that there's a comment there about building control officers allowing the use of Class 0 materials when those of limited combustibility were required. Was any reason for that given at the meeting?
My understanding is that this relates to the LABC certificate or approval that referred to, I believe, referred to K15 as being equivalent to a Class 0, a limited combustibility material, or I forget the exact wording.
I see. Was there specific discussion of the LABC approval for K15?
I don't recall specific discussion at this particular meeting, no.
Right. Right. So just to be clear, though, your personal understanding was that the reason, is this right, that the reason why building control officers were permitting the use of Class 0 materials above 18 metres as insulation materials was because of the LABC approval for K15?
That had been suggested to me, yes.
By whom?
I believe Chris Macy
Wintek.
highlighted that to me, yes.
Right. What did you think? What was your reaction to discovering that?
I didn't really understand the basis for the claim in that certificate. I didn't understand how it could say a combustible material was of limited combustibility.
Was the LABC an ordinary member or even a sponsor member of CWCT?
No.
Right. Did CWCT have any links, formal or informal, with LABC?
No.
At this point, did you yourself investigate what the LABC approval actually said about K15 to get to the bottom of why it was that BCOs were permitting the use of Class 0 materials?
I think I had a copy of the certificate, and I read the certificate.
And what did you make of it when you read it?
As I said, it was difficult to understand how they were saying that a combustible product could be treated as if it was limited combustibility.
Did you raise that thought with anybody?
With colleagues at CWCT and potentially this meeting, but not externally, no.
You say potentially at this meeting. Was Brian Martin present at this point in the discussion, do you remember?
I don't think so.
Right. Did you, given that he wasn't, but had been at least there for part of the time, did you think to yourself, make a mental note of going back to Brian Martin and alerting him specifically to this general problem, namely that building control officers were, as I think as you say, relying on the LABC approval for K15?
I didn't do that, no, but Brian Martin would have received a copy of these minutes where that's highlighted.
Right. He may have done, but he may not have realised that last sentence was referring to the LABC approval on which building control officers relied.
As I said, I don't specifically recall if we discussed the LAB certificate at this meeting, but that we had discussions about it.
You say Brian Martin wasn't present for this part of the discussion. How do you remember that?
That is my recollection of the meeting. I have no proof or evidence of that, but that is my recollection of the meeting.
No, I understand that. And the reason I ask the question, and I know it's difficult, is that is there anything you remember specifically about him getting up and leaving before you got to the 12.7 point?
No.
Right. Did you have any discussions in front of Brian Martin at this meeting about 12.7, its ambit in general, or the meaning of filler materials, etc., in particular?
I don't think so.
Right. Had you spoken to Brian Martin about that question or those questions before the meeting?
No.
What about afterwards?
We thought the conclusion of the meeting in terms of 12.7 was quite reasonable. It was agreed that an FAQ would be written that would be agreed with Brian Martin and DCLG in order to clarify clause 12.7.
we'll come back to that in
Yes.
due course. Before we go on to that, can I just ask you, was this the first time you'd met Brian Martin?
Yes, I think so.
Right. If we go down to the heading underneath that on page 3, you'll see a new heading which says use of ACM on high-rise buildings. And it reads as follows. ACM refers to aluminium composite material. The normal material consists of 2 skins of aluminium approximately 0.5 millimetre thick, separated by a polyethylene core 2 to 5 millimetres thick. This material generally achieves a reaction to fire classification of class 0 or class B S1D0. There are versions available with a mineral core which can achieve a 2 S1D0. There are also similar materials available with other materials such as copper used for the facing. There have been major fires in buildings in various parts of the world, including the Middle East and France, where ACM materials have been used for the cladding, with the ACM responsible for external fire spread. You address this section of the meeting minutes in your statement at paragraph 31. If we can go to page 8 of your statement, please, at the very bottom, and over to page 9. But picking up the last line of page 8, you say, I do not recall who stated that this material generally achieves a reaction to fire classification of class 0 or class B S1D0. I do not recall researching the specific performance of PEACM in 2014. See that?
Yes.
And then you say, I believe at this time I was aware that combustible ACM cladding was being used. You see that?
Yes.
This understanding would have come from general discussions with industry colleagues, but don't recall any specifics. I did not know how widespread their use was. I did not know if MHCLG was aware of their use. You see that?
Yes.
Now, if we go back to the bottom of page 8, please, that is all prefaced by what you say at the beginning of that paragraph. I do not have any specific recollections of this aspect of the meeting. And then you go on to say you were aware of fires involving polyethylene cord ACM, and you don't think Brian Martin was there for that discussion either. And then you say this, I assume that by the normal material we were referring to standard grade polyethylene cord ACM. Can you recall whether any particular persons led those parts of the discussion at the meeting?
I believe myself and Alan Keeler would have introduced the topic of discussion and opened it up to the meeting to hear views and opinions of what we were discussing.
Right. And this had come purely from the UAE and French experience, had it?
Yes.
Not from particular people in the industry.
As I said, Nick Jenkins,
Apart from Nick Jenkins, right.
raised it the year before, and yeah, there were fires overseas. We may have had questions at CWCT regarding their use, and this was to better understand the issue.
Now, you say, I do not think Brian Martin was present for this discussion. Again, is there a specific reason for remembering that he wasn't there?
No. The only thing I can add is that our meeting started with a general discussion. My recollection is that went on for quite a long time because there was quite a lot to discuss. And as I said, Brian Martin wasn't able to attend the whole meeting, and I think by the time we got on to talking about combustibility of materials and so on, he had left.
Right. Now, you refer to the normal material consisting of 2 skins of aluminium separated by a polyethylene core. And was the normal material 100% PE? You
Yes.
say standard grade, but by
Yeah.
that do you mean 100%?
By standard grade, yes, we would be 100% polyethylene cord.
I see. Now, does that mean that was the normal, usual grade specified for high-rise projects in England and Wales at the time?
Probably, yes.
When you say probably, the word normally or normal appears in the note, and you explain it in your statement. Can you do better than probably?
It could be normal, as in it was the normal, as in the standard grade, and then there were alternative grades that achieved different levels of performance. I don't know.
And what was the basis on which you'd understood that the normal specification for high-rise projects in England and Wales was for 100% polyethylene core ACM panels?
That can only have come from discussions with industry colleagues.
Can you remember?
We don't specify specific material. We're not involved in specific projects. So that would have come from our discussions with colleagues and inquiries that we would have received.
Right. Did you know at the time you read these minutes, or drafted them, I should say, whether or not ACM 100% PE cored panels had been installed on high-rise buildings historically in England and Wales?
Our understanding is that they had been used, yes.
Yes. Now, if we go, please, to your statement at page 9, paragraph 32, top of the page, you say, I believe that at the time I was aware that combustible ACM cladding was being used on high-rise residential buildings. This understanding would have come from general discussions with industry colleagues, but I do not recall any specifics. I did not know how widespread their use was. And then you say, I did not know if MHCLG were aware of their use. Now, were any specific brands of ACM panels discussed at the meeting?
Not that I recall.
Was it your understanding? Well, let me ask you this way. What was your understanding, as at July 2014, about what class, whether national or Euro norm, ACM 100% PE core panels achieved?
I can only go on what was written in the minutes. I don't recall, as I say in my statement, I don't recall doing any specific research prior to that meeting. I almost certainly would have done in order to prepare myself for that meeting. So it's highly likely that I would have looked at Agrimon certificates and other literature to try and establish the performance, but I said I don't recall specifically doing that.
Right. Was it your understanding, as at early July 2014, that National Class 0 or Euro Norm Class B external cladding panels were allowed for use on buildings over 18 metres?
Yes.
Was it your impression at this meeting that it was generally known that ACM panels with 100% PE core were being used over 18 metres?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Did those present at the meeting appear to you, at least, to be aware of the fact that ACM was responsible for major fires in the Middle East and France that you've mentioned?
Yes.
Yes. So that came as no surprise to those at the meeting, did it?
I don't think so.
No. Do you recall anybody expressing concern at the meeting that a major fire could occur in the UK, in England and Wales particularly, because of the use of ACM with a 100% core in an external wall build-up over 18 metres?
Nobody said that specifically.
Right. Now, we, I think, have seen this in your statement of paragraph 31, the top of page 9. You say you didn't research the specific performance of PEACM in 2014. Why was that?
I said I don't recall researching. I almost certainly did in preparation for this meeting, but I don't recall specifically doing that.
I see. That's not quite what you've written there.
Well, I've written I don't recall researching the specific performance, and I don't recall doing that. But I would have done some research prior to the meeting to better understand the topic, and that may well have included looking at the performance of these products. But I don't remember doing that.
I follow. So, in fact, your evidence is you are likely to have done so, but don't specifically recall doing so.
Yes.
And why would you say you were likely to have done so? Did you have a practice of doing so?
Well, yes, I would have prepared for that meeting the best way that I could have done, which would have been looking at the requirements in approved document B, looking at material performance where appropriate.
Yes. Do you remember whether there was any pressure or lobbying from sponsors or members of CWCT about how the CWCT should approach this question?
No, absolutely not.
Right. Now, if we go back to the minutes of the meeting, please, at the top of page 4, we can see there that there's a link. This is in italics. There's a link given to a seminar on the fire safety of facades from Paris in the previous year, which had been given by Nathan White, Michael Delicatosis, Marty Aarons, and Amanda Kimball, yes?
Yes.
That link, was that something that you expected your members to be able to access easily or be familiar with?
It was a publicly available record of that conference, so I think we found it just by searching for it.
Can you, in a sentence, tell us what the message of that paper was?
I don't recall.
Right. And if we go on underneath that in normal type, it says this. It was stated that Clause 12.7 of ADB is intended to prohibit the use of polyethylene cord ACM in buildings over 18 metres as they are not classed as limited combustibility. This is not clear from the wording of the current clause. The current clause is preceded by a heading, insulation materials stroke products, which implies that it only applies to insulation. The wording of the main text refers to filler materials, which could be taken to include the polyethylene core, but this is not clear. Now, you tell us about this in your statement, and let's go to that. Back to your statement, please, this time page 10, paragraph 36. And there at the top of the page you say this. I believe that the person who, quotes, stated, unquotes, that Clause 12.7 of ADB is intended to prohibit the use of polyethylene cord ACM in buildings over 18 metres, close quotes, was Sarah Colwell of BRE. However, this was not my interpretation of Clause 12.7 of ADB, which referred to requiring, quotes, insulation products and filler materials to be of limited combustibility. I did not consider this to apply to cladding materials in general, or more specifically the core material of an ACM panel. And I recall that the general view of those present echoed my view as described. I do not recall specifically if anybody shared the view put forward. However, I believe that the general view of those present was that Clause 12.7 required clarification. This meeting was taking place in July 2014. As indicated, I did not consider that the wording of 12.7 was clear and unambiguous, and this view was shared as recorded in the minutes. Whilst the guidance related to insulation products was clear, the term filler materials was not defined, nor was it a commonly used term in the facade industry. It was therefore unclear what materials were considered to be, quotes, filler materials. As stated in the meeting minutes, the title of Clause 12.7 was also confusing as it implied that it only applied to insulation material stroke products rather than materials more generally. This section of the minutes therefore reflects the discussion that took place. And then, if you go on, please, to page 11, and I'm sorry to read chunks of this to you, but there are questions that do follow. You say this on page 11 at paragraph 40. By way of further explanation, Clause 12.7 refers to requirements for insulation products and filler materials and not specifically cladding panels. A rain screen panel is considered to be neither an insulation product, a rain screen panel has a drained and ventilated cavity behind and therefore doesn't contribute to the thermal performance of a wall, or a filler material. ADB provides a list of filler materials that were excluded, such as gaskets, sealants and similar. Examples of what were considered as filler materials were not given, and therefore there was uncertainty over the meaning of filler. However, my understanding was that it did not apply to a rain screen panel. Furthermore, the title of the clause was insulation material stroke products, and therefore it was thought to only apply to insulation material. When I used the term current view, I was referring to what appeared to CWCT to be the accepted view of the industry. It is not possible to list all the people or organisations in the industry, but prior to the meeting in July 2014, I do not recall discussing this with anyone who had an alternative view. The term confusing arises because of the uncertainty over the definition of a filler material, quotes unquote, but I'm not aware of anyone who considered this to include rain screen cladding panels, for example. Now, was this meeting in July 2014 the first time that it had been suggested to you that Clause 12.7 of ADB applied to the external panels used on facades above 18 metres?
Yes.
Did Sarah Colwell actually say that it was the word filler, or the phrase filler material, or perhaps etc., in 12.7 that meant that it extended to all elements in the external wall panel, or at least to the core of an ACM panel?
a logical explanation wasn't really given. There were two. Well, some were saying that filler referred to the core. I don't recall Sarah Colwell saying that. She said that the intention of the clause was that it applied to the whole of the external wall system. I don't recall her giving a logical explanation for that interpretation based on what was written.
So you say you don't recall her giving a logical explanation. Do you recall her explaining to the meeting what word or words within 12.7 led to the clause applying to the whole of the external wall system?
No, it wasn't clear.
Right. So I take it from that answer that she didn't say at the meeting, it's the word filler or it's the phrase filler material which does it, which means that the requirement of a material of limited combustibility applies to the whole of the external wall build-up.
I don't recall anything that specific being said. So the term filler was suggested by some to apply to, as I said, the core of an ACM or more generally to the cladding, but it wasn't clear from what was written, it wasn't clear from what Sarah was saying that was actually what that was the situation.
We've seen what you've said in your statement at some length, but what was your reaction to Sarah Colwell's suggested interpretation of clause 12.7 at the meeting?
It was very different to the view that CWCT had.
Right. Did anybody at the meeting agree with her interpretation or her expression of the intention?
I don't recall anybody agreeing with it.
Right. Do you remember how others reacted to what she was saying in that respect?
I think there was an element of surprise. I think the CWCT view, and that had been formed by our reading of the guidance and also discussions with industry colleagues, was that 12.7 didn't apply to the cladding. So to be told that the intention of that clause was to include everything, I think was a surprise for most people.
And is that why then the minute records that it wasn't clear?
Yes.
What was the position that there was, because it was now apparent that there were two possible interpretations, this lack of clarity had arisen?
I think that there was the wording used, insulation products, filler materials, etc. It simply wasn't clear, I don't think, to anybody exactly what that meant, other than insulation products. That was the simple bit. The filler materials and what that applied to, it just wasn't clear.
Right. Was there any discussion at the meeting about what specifically would meet the definition of the word filler or phrase filler material?
No.
No. Did Sarah Colwell explain any of the background about why the word filler or phrase filler material had been introduced into ADB in 2006?
Not that I recall in this meeting, no.
Now, in your statement, let's just look at it. It's page 15, please, paragraph 54. You say there, I believe I had first read BCA Technical Guidance Note 18, Issue 0, in July 2014. I cannot now recall when I first read Issue 1. I do not know who authored BCA Technical Guidance Note 18. Neither I nor CWCT were involved at all in BCA Technical Guidance Note 18. Now, I think it's right that there's no mention at all of BCA Technical Guidance Note 18, Issue 0, in these meeting minutes, is there?
No, there isn't. It was at this meeting that I first became aware of BCA Technical Guidance Note 18, Issue 0.
Right, I see. That was
So I would have read that technical guidance note after this meeting.
Do you remember who it was who pointed you in the direction of BCA Technical Guidance Note 18?
I don't.
Right. As a matter of record, you will have then learnt that it had been published the previous month, June 2014, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Was there any discussion at the meeting, do you recall, of the fact consistent with the Colwell view of 12.7 that the BCA had the previous month put out Technical Guidance Note 18, which said that all elements of the external wall build-up, including external facings, had to be materials of limited combustibility.
I'm sorry, can you rephrase that question?
Yes. Was there any discussion? Do you remember anybody discussing at the meeting the fact that the BCA had put out guidance the previous month, which was consistent with what I might call the Colwell view of 12.7?
We had a short discussion about the BCA technical guidance, as I recall, but having not read it, it was difficult to contribute to that significantly. So we took it upon ourselves to go away and read that meeting, read that technical guidance note, and try and sort of work it all out.
Were you surprised to learn that the BCA had itself put out guidance which was consistent with the view expressed by Sarah Colwell at the meeting about 12.7?
Yes.
Were any of those present at the 2nd of July 2014 meeting members of the BCA, to your knowledge?
Not that I recall. Someone from NHBC was invited to that meeting but couldn't attend.
That's right, Dave White.
Yes.
Yes, and he couldn't attend. Was NHBC a habitual attendee at technical meetings such as this at the time?
No.
Why was NHBC invited?
I think we wanted to get the views of as many different people and organisations as possible, and obviously they have an important role to play in the approval of materials and systems, so it seemed appropriate to invite them to that meeting.
Right. Did you have a contact at NHBC?
Dave White was our main contact, as far as I'm aware.
Right. You say our main contact. Who was the individual within CWCT who knew Dave White or was familiar enough with him to invite him?
I think we'd all met him at various times.
Was there any discussion at the meeting that you can recall about how the, if I can use a shorthand, the Colwell BCA view that all elements of the external wall build-up had to be materials of limited combustibility, including external facings, was consistent with diagram 40 and the requirement in there that panels need only achieve either national class 0 or Euro class B?
It's not consistent, and that was part of the problem. That was why we wanted to get that clause, if you like, officially clarified, because we were being offered an interpretation or a view that didn't appear consistent with what was written, and also appeared to contradict another clause within the document.
Did anybody at the meeting challenge Sarah Colwell and point out the anomaly that you've actually just pointed out?
I suspect we did. As I say, we excuse me, we were surprised to hear what Sarah Colwell had to say, and we would have certainly questioned how you reached that conclusion, because it didn't seem logical to us.
Do you remember whether she gave any answer when asked about?
I don't recall the specifics, I'm afraid.
If we go back to the minutes, please. Page 4, third paragraph down. This is CLG 3019336. It says this: it was suggested that clarification could be achieved by means of an FAQ. Approved documents can be downloaded from the government planning portal, the details of which are set out there. The page for each approved document also has an FAQ section related to that approved document. Sarah Colwell agreed to raise this with Brian Martin. And going back to your statement then, looking at that, please, page 10, paragraph 37, you say there, in the third line, I think it was Sarah Colwell who suggested the idea of an FAQ, and my view was that this was a good suggestion, as I felt that 12.7 required clarification for the reasons outlined above. The need for clarification also reflected the consensus of the meeting, and I considered this an appropriate course of action. In the absence of reissuing an amended ADB, providing official clarification via the planning portal, where the approved documents are available, seemed reasonable. This suggestion was generally well received, and my recollection is that Sarah Colwell said she would discuss the issue with Brian Martin to agree a way forward. I'm sure that Brian Martin had left the meeting prior to this discussion. I cannot recall Sarah Colwell's specific reaction to this discussion, but the consensus was to seek clarification. So just to be clear, is this right? The consensus at the end of the meeting was that clarification should be sought, not that it had been decided and accepted that the term filler in 12.7 did include the core of an ACM panel.
Yes, we wanted that to be officially clarified.
One way or the other?
Yes.
Right. Was there any discussion about an actual amendment to approved document B rather than an FAQ?
There wasn't, because, as I said, Brian Martin had left the meeting by that point. So at this meeting, there was no discussion about an amended version of approved document B being produced.
Were you yourself aware of any other FAQs having been published which clarified approved document B or other similar statutory guidance documents?
I think I was aware of them in general, yes, but I can't give you a specific example.
Right. Did anybody at the meeting, to the best of your recollection, express the view that that ADB wasn't keeping up with modern methods of construction?
I don't think that was. I don't think we had a conversation that went along that lines, but that is what this whole clause is really about. I think it's about recognising that materials have changed and whether the guidance has kept pace with those materials.
If we continue in the minutes, please, at page 4. You can see that there's a heading, breather membranes, and just above that, there's some words in italics. How would this affect other materials used for rain screen panels, e.g. high-pressure laminate? Obviously, that's referring to what's above it. Do you remember whether there was any discussion about that at the meeting?
I think that note in italics kind of highlights the lack of clarity that we still had. It still wasn't clear to us whether or not 12.7 was being said to apply to everything, or whether the core of an ACM was to be considered a filler and therefore it fell into clause 12.7, and therefore this was raising, what about other panels that may or may not be covered by that clause?
The words in italics are, is this right, are your sort of notes to self or questions to self rather than a record of what was discussed at the meeting?
Yes, that's correct.
Was there any consensus, do you remember, about whether materials such as high-pressure laminates were subject to the limited combustibility recommendations in 12.7?
I don't think we discussed them in any great detail.
Right. I mean, it looks as if nobody at the meeting was able to offer any kind of explanation because the matter was left as a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Now let's look at something from Kingspan. Can we please go to KIN 000026300? This is the witness statement of David Cookson of Kingspan. And if we go to page 19 in that, please, we can see what he recalls of this meeting. This is at paragraph 2.106. And he says this. One thing that does stand out in my mind from the CWCT meeting is that when Brian Martin left the meeting, he said something along the lines of, quotes, "There's going to be a major fire," close quotes. My recollection of this comment is that it related to the quality of installation and the issue with cavity barriers, which is referred to under the heading rain screen cavity barriers at page 3 of the CWCT minutes, rather than simply the use of ACM. However, I cannot fully recall. Is Mr. Cookson right in his recollection?
I don't recall Brian Martin saying that. We had a discussion prior to talking about combustibility of materials. We did discuss fire stopping and rain screen cavity barriers, and there were suggestions that they weren't always installed properly. So that part of Mr. Cookson's statement is, I think, accurate, but I don't recall Brian Martin saying those words.
You don't recall him saying those words? Now, we touched on this before a little bit. Were you contacted by Brian Martin or anybody else at what was then the DCLG after this meeting as a follow-up to what was discussed as visible from the minutes?
No.
Did you think yourself about contacting Brian Martin after the meeting to make sure he was fully up to speed with those parts of the meeting he missed, given particularly what had come as a surprise to you from Sarah Colwell about the ambit of 12.7?
We didn't. No, we felt that the approach that had been agreed at the meeting, that Sarah Colwell would draft an FAQ that would then be sent to Brian Martin for approval, seemed to be an appropriate course of action. So we at that point we left it at that.
I follow. Now, I want to take you back in time to 2002. At BRE 30423031. Now, I appreciate, of course, this was at a time before you joined CWCT, but I want to show it to you and ask you about it. It's a letter dated the 15th of August 2002 to Sarah Colwell from Alan Keeler, as you can see from the bottom of the screen. And it says, Dear Dr. Colwell, and the topic is revision of BR 135, fire performance of external thermal insulation for walls of multi-storey buildings. Dr. Ledbetter has asked me to respond to your letter concerning the above. And then he says this, ventilated rain screens are a cost-effective form of construction used widely throughout Europe. The generic data supporting the revision of BR 135 show that all the rain screen systems tested failed to meet the test criteria. We are concerned that the use of the proposed test will lead to the abandonment of this method of construction without any guarantee that alternative forms of construction are available, particularly for multi-storey buildings, where weight is an important consideration. If this occurs, there could be economic consequences for the building industry and the UK as a whole. It was emphasised at the outset of the work of the BSI committee that it is necessary to take account of the needs of industry and the use of energy in buildings. The data presented would tend to suggest the use of rendered systems at the expense of rain screen systems. There is general concern at the durability of these systems, particularly when used for new construction. Now, were you ever made aware of this letter and the consultation to which it related?
No, it was before I joined CWCT.
Was there a time when you became aware of the competing views about the impact of large-scale fire testing on the use of rain screen systems?
No, I don't think so.
Had it ever been the case, to your knowledge, that the CWCT had lobbied against the introduction of large-scale fire tests?
No, we had not.
You hadn't. Did the fact that rain screen systems were failing large-scale fire testing ever come to your knowledge?
Only since I've been aware of this letter and the background to it.
So since, does that...
So this letter was, I believe this letter was mentioned in the opening statement before Christmas.
I see. So in preparation to give evidence in the inquiry.
Yes.
Right, I see. Do you know what the views of CWCT were at the time about how industry could ensure rain screen systems were safe in relation to external fire spread if large-scale testing was undesirable?
My understanding of this is that we were asked by BRE to comment on the test method. CWCT had been provided with limited data of the systems that had been tested and the results that had been achieved. And those results showed that all the rain screen systems failed the test. Our concern was that by this point, rain screen systems were a commonly used system in the UK and across Europe, and publishing a test where it wasn't clear if rain screen could meet the requirements of that test would clearly cause an issue. And with the limited data that we had available, it wasn't clear to us whether the test was inappropriate, whether the right combination of materials had not been assessed to establish whether or not it could pass. So our view was that further testing should be carried out in order to establish the validity of the test.
Do you remember when it was that the CWCT had been provided with the limited data of the systems that had been tested?
It would have been presumably sometime in 2002, but I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Okay. Was the CWCT or any of its members represented on the BSI committee that's referred to here?
I think Dr. Stephen Ledbetter was involved in that committee, but I don't know that for certain.
Do you remember, or do you know whether the CWCT saw any economic consequences for the building industry after BR 135 was republished in 2003?
No.
Were the views of the CWCT members reflected in the concerns expressed here?
I don't think so. I think that the information provided to us was confidential, and therefore we were not able to disseminate it to our members. So they were our comments.
To your knowledge, did the CWCT ever take any steps to prevent BS 8414 and BR 135 becoming part of the guidance in approved document B, as we know it did in 2006?
No.
No.
So we had no issues with a test method being produced as a means of demonstrating compliance. The issue that we raised here was that the limited amount of testing hadn't shown whether rain screen systems could pass that test or not, and therefore further testing was required.
Turning to a different topic, you've referred earlier in your evidence this morning, and indeed in your statement, as we'll see, to a meeting or discussions with Nick Jenkins of Boothmury in 2013. Can we please look at your statement, page 9, paragraph 34? You say there, it had also been suggested to us in a meeting in June 2013 by Nick Jenkins, then of Boothmury, that there had been instances of polyethylene core ACMs failing in the event of a fire in the Middle East. I did not have sufficient knowledge to conclude that the combustible ACM were responsible for external fire spread. There appeared to be enough evidence emerging at the time to suggest combustible ACM were a concern. I do not know if Sarah Colwell or Brian Martin were also concerned about this. One of the key issues, as far as we were concerned, was that the guidance given in ADB Clause 12.7 did not appear to prohibit their use, and for this reason it was suggested at our meeting that this clause be clarified. Now, the reference to the end of the paragraph there to our meeting, is that a reference to the meeting with Nick Jenkins in 2013 or a reference to the 2nd of July 2014 CWCT meeting?
That's a reference to the 2nd of July 2014 meeting.
I see. What had caused you to meet Nick Jenkins in 2013?
So in 2013 and before, we were drafting a document on built-up walls. So a document covering rain screen systems and render systems, the components used, the materials used, the different forms of construction, and so on, and also some of the performance characteristics that they needed to meet. And we had a steering group meeting of that built-up walls group in June 2013, which was attended by Nick Jenkins and others. And I think at that meeting, we were discussing some of the performance characteristics, including fire performance.
Who else was present at the meeting? Do you remember?
We had no, I don't. I can't give you a complete list of names. Sorry.
Do you remember what action Nick Jenkins wanted CWCT to take to address the concerns he had about the use of PE core ACM panels?
I don't think that there was anything specific that came out of this meeting other than it was information for us, which later combined with the information from Chris Macy and others led to the formation of our fire group.
After the meeting with Nick Jenkins in June 2013 that you refer to, did you investigate the claims he made about PE core ACM panels and the fires in the Middle East?
I think we were aware of fires in the Middle East at that point. As I said before, we didn't have any specific knowledge of the different materials or systems that had been used on those buildings, so it was very difficult for a non-fire expert to conclude exactly what the issues were.
Right. Did you look into what precise ingredients in the external wall build-up had been involved in those Middle East fires?
All we knew was what was reported in the construction press. So
Could you get no further than that?
No.
Can we take it that you were well aware of the dangers of the use of ACM with a polyethylene core from June 2013 at the latest?
It was certainly becoming clearer at that point that there were concerns over these products, yes.
Yes. Now, I want to ask you about an email chain in July 2014, after the CWCT meeting on the 2nd of July. If we go, please, to BRE 3016101. And the email chain begins on the 7th of July 2014, so 5 days or so after the CWCT meeting on the 2nd. And just to paraphrase for you the start of the chain, Stuart Taylor at Wintek is querying advice given by your colleague Alan Keeler about the use of carrier panels over 18 metres. Wintek have taken the view, I think, that 12.7 includes cladding panels. Alan Keeler disagrees. And Stuart Taylor is sending his answer to you for your thoughts. Just to be clear, you'll recall that Stuart Taylor had been at the 2nd of July meeting.
Yes.
Right. Now, let's start then at page 3 with your response to Stuart Taylor on the 7th of July 2014 at, as you can see, 13:11. Yes?
Yes.
It's just about visible. And you say this: "Hi, Stuart. I've just had a chat to Alan about this, and we stand by his original response to Carrier dated 19th June 2014. Based on what is currently written in ADB, it would appear that the Carrier rain screen panels comply for use over 18 metres. The panels achieve BS1D0 in accordance with EN 13501 and R-Class 0, and therefore would meet the requirements for external surfaces given in clause 12.6 diagram 40. Yes?
Yes.
Then it goes on. Clause 12.7 makes no reference to cladding panels, etc., and the current view, note those words, current view, is that it does not apply to such materials. Where it gets confusing is that the discussions we had last week went a lot further and suggested that the materials referred to in clause 12.7 include panels and membranes, etc. We still do not know if this is the intention of that clause. If it is very poorly written and misleading and needs clarifying ASAP." Now, just pausing there, when you make reference to the current view at the beginning of that third paragraph there, whose current view was that?
That was the view of CWCT and our view of the industry perspective on that clause prior to the discussions that we had on the 2nd of July.
Right. So it was CWCT's continuing opinion, but also, from what you could tell, the opinion of those others at the meeting who heard Sarah Colwell.
Yes.
Is that how,
it was our general understanding of the industry view of clause 12.7.
So can we take it from that? I think it would follow that in this email you are reflecting the fact that the CWCT, at least, had not accepted Sarah Colwell's interpretation of 12.7 and were awaiting clarification from the government.
We wanted clarification.
Yes. Indeed. ASAP, in
Yes.
fact. Yes. How were you aware that these carrier panels achieved BS1D0?
I can only assume that we were sent information that gave the reaction to fire classification, or otherwise I would have done some research and found that out myself.
Right, I see. Were you aware of any large-scale, full-system tests that have been done with carrier panels?
No.
Right. So at the time you wrote this email, you weren't aware of any 8414 tests done to BR135 which had succeeded so far as carrier panels were concerned?
I wasn't aware of any 8414 tests with.
Did you have any
panels.
concerns in recommending the use of carrier over 18 metres, given the matters that had been discussed at the 2nd July 2014 meeting?
We weren't recommending their use. We were providing an interpretation of the guidance given in approved document B.
And what consideration did you give to the functional requirements of the building regulations when you wrote this email? Namely, that the requirement in B41 that the external walls should, quotes, adequately resist, close quotes, the spread of fire over the surface of the walls.
Our view, the CWCT view, was that you generally met the functional requirements by following the guidance given in the paragraphs in that section of approved document B, so paragraphs 12.6 to 12.8.
And diagram?
And diagram 40 is referred to in 12.6, yes.
Why didn't you give more cautious advice on the acceptability of these panels, given the views that Sarah Colwell had put forward at the meeting a few days previously?
I don't know. As you've pointed out, Stuart Taylor was at that meeting, so he was aware of the discussions that had taken place, and he would have been aware of the FAQ that we hoped would be produced that would clarify this issue. We were responding based on what was currently at that time written in approved document B.
Korea are a member of CWCT, aren't they?
Yes.
Were the CWCT ever put under any kind of pressure by Korea to recommend their products for use?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Right. Can we take it from your email to Stuart Taylor that you had advised and were advising members of the construction industry that buildings over 18 metres which used Class B or Class 0 external panels met the guidance in approved document B, specifically 12.6 and diagram 40?
Such materials did meet the guidance in 12.6 and diagram 40. At the most, that clause and that diagram referred to Class 0 and Class B.
And you were doing so notwithstanding the views of Sarah Colwell, BRE, at the meeting, that in fact all elements of the external wall build-up should be materials of limited combustibility, including the external wall panels.
I think at this point, as you pointed out, this was 5 days after our 2nd of July meeting. We were still trying to work out exactly what the requirements were based on what we've been told and our view of it. So at this point, we were still providing guidance based on what was actually written in approved document B. That view changed after this. In subsequent CWCT events and training material, we highlighted the inconsistencies around 12.7 and the use of combustible cladding materials.
Had you read the BCA guidance, the BCA Technical Guidance Note 18, by the time of this email? So between the 2nd of July when you learnt about it and the 7th of July when you wrote this email?
I assume I would have done, yes.
So can we take it that when you wrote this email, you were aware of two authoritative voices in the industry, Sarah Colwell's of the BREs and the BCAs, telling you that all elements of the external wall construction, including things like carrier panels, had to be materials of limited combustibility?
Yes.
Yes. But notwithstanding that, you still, as it were, rode the other horse and were pushing the narrower view.
At this particular point, very soon after the July 2nd meeting, yes, that's clearly what we did.
Yes. Now, going back to the email, if we can, on the page, in the last line it says, "I hope this is of some use. I'm very sorry that I cannot give you a definitive answer. The more we look into the fire regulations, the messier it becomes. What is clear is that further guidance is needed, and I hope CWCT will be able to provide this soon." When you said the more you looked into the fire regulations, the messier it becomes. What did you mean?
I can only assume that this relates to clause 12.7 and the different views that had been expressed, whether the intention of that clause was to apply to all materials in the cladding system, whether the intention was that the core of an ACM was considered a filler material. Those were two different views that would lead you to different conclusions about what was acceptable and what wasn't.
Yes. When you said soon, what time frame did you have in mind?
At this point, we hoped that an FAQ would be published very quickly. If it was as straightforward as we're being told, that the intention of clause 12.7 was to include all materials, there seemed no reason to us why that couldn't be done very quickly, published as an FAQ on the planning portal website, and that would have cleared it up.
Did you think at the time that anyone was actually leading that effort, either within government or pushing government, other than perhaps Sarah Colwell's suggestion?
Well, our understanding, the commitment made by Sarah Colwell at our 2nd of July meeting was that BRE would draft an FAQ and discuss it and agree it with Brian Martin. That was an action from that meeting. We assumed that would happen quickly.
Did you think at the time, you say that would happen quickly, and you say quickly, can you give us a time frame? Days, weeks, months?
Weeks would have been nice.
Right. Well, it would have been nice, and certainly with hindsight, because of course, at the time, this is July 2014, Rainabond PE 55 ACM panels with a 100% core were being examined for use at Grenfell Tower. So
Yes.
Nice would have been. But why did you expect that the FAQ would have been published on the website within weeks? Was that your experience?
We had no experience of FAQs being produced for the planning portal, but I think we assumed that if it was clear that the intention of clause 12.7 was to include everything, there would be no reason, no desire to not get that published as quickly as possible.
Do you recall any internal discussion within CWCT about putting something out to your members at least, and on your website, that there was now a serious controversy about the meaning and ambit of clause 12.7, and that those specifying at the very least 100% polyethylene ACM panels in high-rise buildings needed to take advice and be very careful before they did so in the light of that controversy?
I don't think we had any discussions about putting anything on our website, but at this point we had already committed to having an afternoon session at our upcoming members' meeting, which was to be in October of 2014. The afternoon session was dedicated to fire, and these issues would be discussed with those in attendance at that meeting.
That's some months down the track, though, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, was any thought given to putting out an urgent message to your members, whether in a mail shot or on your website, that they needed now to be extremely careful before specifying ACM PE core panels, certainly with 100% PE core above 18 metres, pending clarification from government?
No, we didn't do that.
Why is that?
I honestly, it did not. It wasn't something we considered because, as I said before, we simply assumed that the FAQ would be written promptly and that would clarify the issue officially.
Right. Well, let's see how this continues. Can we go up the email chain to the bottom of page 2, please? This is an email from Stuart Taylor, forwarding the chain to Sarah Colwell, copying you in. You see that?
Yes.
And it says, "Hi, Sarah. There still appears to be great confusion regarding ADB clause 12.7. In the recent fire group meeting, we briefly discussed the scope of 12.7, in particular whether it includes all components within the facade construction, i.e. not just insulation products. It has been Wintek's understanding for many years that all elements of the facade construction, including rain screen panels, etc., should comply with clause 12.7 when the building has a story over 18 metres above ground level. Following the fire group meeting, you stated you would speak with Brian Martin regarding this topic with the intention of providing further clarification within the F&Q section of the ADB portal. In the meantime, I'd be grateful if you would review the short email trail below and provide your interpretation regarding this matter. When you saw that, were you troubled that Wintek's view had been, as they say, for many years, different from that of the CWCT?
That was the first that I had heard of Wintek's view, I think.
And were you troubled by that?
I was surprised,
Right.
I think.
If we go up to the next email in the chain, it's the 6th of August 2014, so now a month or so later, and it's from Stuart Taylor, who writes to you. You see that? Copy to Sarah Colwell.
Yes.
Sorry, we don't know. It may not be, but certainly the one above it is. But he says this: David, I've just spoken with Sarah. She has proposed that CWCT, Wintek and BRE meet to discuss this issue further with the intention of formulating the wording for the proposed F&Q section within the ADB portal. It's proposed that this wording is then presented to Brian Martin for his sign-off. Sarah is currently away until September, and it is suggested that we meet around 8th or 9th September. A venue for the meeting is not set. However, we can meet at BRE or CWCT. Sarah also proposes that we can discuss any other questions / queries regarding ADB at the meeting. Can you please confirm if this is acceptable? Was there any response from Sarah Colwell to Stuart Taylor's first email that you were aware of? In other words, explaining that there was confusion over 12.7 and seeking guidance on the use of the carrier panels.
Not that I'm aware of.
Now, we get to the possibility of a meeting not till September, which is now 2 months on from the July meeting. So we're getting beyond weeks into months, still no FAQ. Were you concerned by this stage, this is now August, that there wouldn't be a resolution to this until September?
No, I don't think we were overly concerned. If a meeting was being proposed in September and that would agree the wording as suggested by Stuart Taylor, then that seemed
Right.
a little longer than was ideal, but that still seemed sufficient.
Right, so ASAP, 3 months is still ASAP, so far as you're concerned.
Well, it would have been better had it been quicker.
Now, the rest of the email chain concerns the setting up of the meeting, and I think you and Alan Keeler attended on the 8th of September 2014, didn't you?
No, I didn't attend.
You didn't attend.
Alan Keeler attended, I didn't.
You're quite right. And you tell us in your statement that you understood that it was confirmed at the meeting that Sarah Colwell or the BRE would draft the FAQ and send it to CWCT for comment, yes?
Yes, that was our understanding.
Did you go back to Carrier with this information?
No,
Why is that?
I don't know.
Did you think to retract the advice that you'd given to the Carrier or about the acceptability of the Carrier panels while waiting for the FAQ to be finalised?
No, we didn't.
Why is that?
It didn't. I can only say that it didn't occur to us. I don't know.
Now, Mr. Chairman, we're in the middle of the run of points, but going to a different document.
Oh, are we going to a meeting next?
No, we're going to an email next. This will take about 5 minutes to finish off, and then we can turn to a.
If you mean 5 minutes, we'll go on.
Yes, I think so. I think I do. Now let's go to BRE 403722, please. This is the day after the meeting between Wintek and BRE, at which Alan Keeler was present, 8th September. And this is an email from Alan Keeler, halfway down your screen, to Sarah Colwell, Stephen Howard and Tony Baker at the BRE, copy to you and Stuart Taylor. Fire performance of facades. And he says this: Dear all, further to our discussion, yesterday I attached copies of LABC approvals relating to Kingspan K15. The 2008 approval, which has presumably lapsed, assumes that K15 can be considered a material of limited combustibility and can therefore be used for walls greater than 18 metres high. It does require other parts of the wall to be non-combustible, but makes no reference to cavity barriers. A number of questions arise. As this approval makes reference to BS 8414 tests, is it justified to apply the results to a stud back wall? As the approval makes reference to BS 8414 tests, should cavity barriers be provided, as in the test configuration? As the approval makes reference to BS 8414 tests, should there be limitations on the thickness of insulation? The current approval is under the registered detail scheme. This does not include the statement considering the material to be of limited combustibility, but comes to the same conclusion that the material can be used where other parts of the wall are non-combustible. Again, there's no reference to cavity barriers. Now, do you remember seeing this email at the time? You certainly were copied in on it.
I can see that I was copied in on it. And therefore I would have read it. I don't recall any of the details.
Did you look at the LABC registered detail for K15, stating that it was a material of limited combustibility, before Alan Keeler attached it here?
Yes, I think I'd seen that before. Yes.
We touched on it
Yes.
earlier, but you think you'd seen it before?
Yes, I think so.
So did you notice at that time, or only at this time, the historic assertion about K15's combustibility?
I think I had seen that previously, as we discussed this morning.
Right. And you had questions about it,
Yes.
put it at its lowest. Did anybody from the BRE respond to Alan Keeler's email?
I don't know.
I mean, we can see, if you go above this, what happens to it within the BRE. It just seems to be sent without reference to Philip Carney, but you don't recall a response.
No.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it is. Thank you very much. Well, we'll have a break now so we can all get some lunch. Mr. Metcalfe, we'll return, please, at 2:05.
Okay.
And while you're out of the room, please remember not to speak to anyone about your evidence or anything
Yes.
relating to it. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, you'd like to go to the usher, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Millett. 2:05, then, please.